Millionaire mocked her, saying she could never be a mother. 5 years later, she crashed his wedding with Quadruplets. The story opens inside an elegant countryside estate where guests are settling into their seats beneath rows of white roses and towering oak trees. A string quartet fills the air as conversations drift between family members, business partners, and lifelong friends. At the front stands Angelo Harbor, adjusting the cuff of his tuxedo while exchanging polite smiles with the people congratulating him. To everyone watching, he looks like a man who has everything: a successful company, a beautiful bride waiting inside, and a future carefully planned. His best man leans over with a grin. Nervous, Angelo lets out a quiet laugh. Only about remembering my vows. The guests chuckle. Without warning, 4 excited little voices cut through the calm. "Mom, wait for us." 4 children race across the stone walkway, weaving between startled guests before charging toward a woman who has just stepped through the garden entrance. Angelo glances over absent-mindedly. Then he stops breathing. The smile disappears from his face. His eyes lock onto the woman. "Virginie," he whispers, barely loud enough for himself to hear. The children throw their arms around Virginie, each trying to tell her a different story at the same time. "Mom, look what I found. Mom, he said we'd get ice cream later. Mom, can I hold your hand?" She laughs, gently brushing hair away from one child's face before kissing another on the forehead. A man follows several steps behind them, carrying 4 tiny jackets over one shoulder while balancing a small backpack in his free hand. "Slow down," he calls with an amused smile. "Give your mother a chance to catch up." Virginie looks at him and smiles, the kind of smile that only comes from complete trust. Angelo cannot take his eyes off her. 5 years. 5 years since he watched her walk away believing she'd never experience the life they once dreamed about together. His fiancée notices the color drain from his face. "Angelo?" she asks quietly. He doesn't answer. He simply watches the children laugh around Virginie as though the world has disappeared. A little girl notices Angelo staring. She tilts her head with innocent curiosity before tugging gently on Virginie's sleeve. "Mommy, who is that man?" For the briefest moment Virginie turns. Her eyes meet Angelo's. There is no anger, no regret, no bitterness, only calm, only peace. She offers a small, polite smile before turning her attention back to the children. Echoes through his mind. "You'll never know what it's like to be a mother." He remembers saying it as though it happened yesterday. Now 4 children surround the woman he once convinced himself could never have the future they both wanted. How? Who were these children? Who was the man standing beside her? And why had fate brought them together on this particular day? Before any answers arrive, let's go back to where this unforgettable story truly began. Before we uncover how one heartbreaking decision led to this unforgettable moment, welcome to Mr. Williams' Story Time. If you're new here, you're in the right place for emotional stories filled with unforgettable characters, unexpected turns, and moments that stay with you long after the ending. If stories like this are your kind of escape, take a second to subscribe and join our growing family. It truly helps the channel reach more people who enjoy meaningful storytelling. And while you're here, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever watched someone walk away from a good relationship because of fear instead of love? Do you think some regrets can ever be repaired? Share your thoughts in the comments before we continue. 5 years before Angelo stood frozen at his own wedding, before 4 joyful little voices stopped him in his tracks, before one quiet smile forced him to confront the worst decision of his life, there was simply a woman named Virginie Sauer. She wasn't searching for luxury. She wasn't chasing wealth. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her. She was searching for one thing money could never guarantee: a partner who would choose her, not only when life unfolded exactly as planned, but also when it didn't. She had no way of knowing that one conversation would test that dream and change the course of 2 lives forever. 5 years earlier, the rhythm of Virginie Sauer's mornings rarely changed. She liked it that way. Every weekday began with a jog through a quiet neighborhood before the city fully woke up. She'd stop at the same family-owned bakery, where the owner already knew her order. "The usual?" he'd ask with a smile. "You know me too well," she'd reply, laughing as she accepted her coffee. Virginie wasn't famous, and she didn't care to be. At 33, she had earned a reputation as one of the most respected architects in her firm. She designed schools, libraries, and affordable housing projects, places where ordinary families could build extraordinary memories. Her co-workers admired her because she never acted as though she was above anyone else. Whether speaking to a client or a construction worker, everyone received the same respect. One afternoon, a junior architect nervously presented his first design proposal. Halfway through, he apologized. I'm sorry. I know it's not very good. Virginie smiled warmly. Don't apologize for learning. Every great building starts as a rough sketch. His shoulders relaxed. Those small moments defined her more than any professional award ever could. Outside of work, life was equally full. Friday dinners with friends, Sunday phone calls with her parents, volunteering whenever she had time. She wasn't lonely. She was simply waiting. Waiting for someone who wanted the same simple future she did. Not mansions, not private islands, not headlines, just a home where laughter came easily. A kitchen that always smelled like breakfast on Sunday mornings. Holiday traditions her future children would one day pass on to their own families. Her best friend Claire teased her over dinner one evening. You know what's funny? Virginie looked up from her plate. What? Every man who asks you out thinks he's competing with another man. Virginie laughed. They're not? Claire shook her head. No. They're competing with the peaceful life you've already created. Virginie smiled. Then maybe the right person won't see it as competition. She paused before adding softly, maybe he'll want to build on it with me. A week later, Virginie received an invitation from a nonprofit organization she had quietly supported for years. They were opening a neighborhood learning center for children, and several local businesses had sponsored the project. Volunteers, donors, teachers, and community leaders were all invited to celebrate the completion of the building. Claire immediately encouraged her to go. You've spent months helping design that place. At least let them thank you properly. Virginie rolled her eyes playfully. You know I hate standing around making small talk. Then don't. Claire grinned. Eat the food, congratulate the kids, and come home. Virginie laughed. That actually sounds manageable. The event wasn't glamorous. Children darted between tables with paper cups of lemonade. Parents proudly toured the classrooms. Teachers pointed out colorful reading corners and activity spaces. The atmosphere felt genuine because everyone there had contributed something. Time, money, skills, or encouragement. Virginie spent most of the afternoon answering questions about the building instead of talking about herself. An elderly woman thanked her with tears in her eyes. My grandson will learn to read here. Virginie squeezed her hand gently. That's the best compliment I could ever receive. As the celebration slowly came to an end, guests began heading toward the parking lot. Volunteers folded tables, collected decorations, stacked chairs. Without thinking twice, Virginie removed her blazer, rolled up her sleeves, and started helping. No cameras, no audience, just another job that needed doing. Across the room, Angelo Harbour had just finished thanking the event organizers. Most people knew him as the founder of one of the country's fastest-growing investment companies. Very few knew he'd insisted that every executive on his team volunteer for at least one community project each month. As conversations wound down, one of his assistants approached. Your car is waiting whenever you're ready. Angelo glanced toward the volunteers. Tell the driver I'll be another 20 minutes. Without another word, he loosened his tie, picked up a stack of folding chairs, and joined everyone else. For several minutes, neither he nor Virginie noticed the other. They simply worked. Eventually, both reached for the same heavy table. Their hands stopped at the same moment. Virginie smiled first. Looks like we're about to argue over furniture. Angelo chuckled. How about we avoid embarrassing ourselves and carry it together? Deal. They lifted the table carefully, navigating through narrow doorways while trying not to bump into anyone. Halfway across the room, Angelo asked, So, do you volunteer often? Whenever I can. Court-ordered community service? Virginie laughed. Not unless someone has secretly reported me. Good. I was beginning to worry. She raised an eyebrow. What about you? I thought sponsors usually disappeared before cleanup started. I tried leaving once. And? My grandmother saw me walking to the car while everyone else was still working. Virginie smiled. I'm guessing that didn't end well. She made me come back. Smart woman. Very. Neither of them realized nearly 40 minutes had passed. The room had emptied. The conversation hadn't. Before they finally left, Angelo cleared his throat. Would it be completely unreasonable if I asked whether you'd like dinner sometime? Virginie folded her arms thoughtfully. That depends. His expression became serious. On what? Whether you're planning to interview me or actually have a conversation. He laughed. Conversation. Definitely conversation. Then yes. Their first date was supposed to be dinner. It became dinner, then coffee, then a walk through downtown streets filled with live music drifting from nearby restaurants. Hours slipped by unnoticed. They debated which city had the best pizza, argued over classic movies, discovered they both loved old bookstores where every shelf seemed to hide a forgotten treasure. When they passed a street musician playing an old love song, Angelo stopped walking. Dance with me. Virginie looked around. Right here? Why not? People are watching. For about 10 seconds, then they'll go back to worrying about their own lives. She laughed. You always this convincing? Only when I'm trying to impress someone. She shook her head with a smile before placing her hand in his. For one song, nothing else seemed to exist. When the music ended, neither wanted the evening to be over. Angelo checked his watch and looked genuinely surprised. We've been talking for 6 hours. Virginie blinked. You're kidding. I wish I were. She smiled to herself as they reached her apartment building. I haven't lost track of time like that in years. Angelo met her eyes. Neither have I. As Virginie disappeared inside, neither of them said it aloud, but both quietly hoped this would be the first of many nights that ended exactly the same way, with one more conversation they didn't want to end. The weeks after their first date slipped by with surprising ease. Neither of them played games. If Angelo wanted to see Virginie, he called. If Virginie was busy, she simply said so. There were no mixed signals, no guessing, no unnecessary drama. One Saturday morning, Angelo texted, "Breakfast?" Virginie replied almost immediately. "Only if you're buying." That's bold for someone who ordered dessert before breakfast last time. That happened once. Twice. You're keeping records already? Only the important ones. Their dates weren't built around expensive restaurants or exclusive clubs. Sometimes they wandered through weekend farmers markets, debating which homemade jam tasted best. Sometimes they spent entire afternoons inside old bookstores, challenging each other to find the strangest book on the shelves. One rainy evening, they ducked into a tiny neighborhood diner after getting caught without umbrellas. The waitress apologized. "I'm sorry, the coffee machine's acting up today." Angelo smiled. "As long as it's warm, we're happy." Virginie leaned closer. "He's pretending to be easygoing." The waitress laughed. "Should I bring him extra sugar?" "Please," Virginie answered before Angelo could speak. He looked offended. "You two met 30 seconds ago." "Good people recognize each other quickly," the waitress teased. By the time they left, the three of them were laughing like old friends. That was what made being with Angelo feel different. The destination rarely mattered. He made ordinary moments memorable simply by being fully present. And Virginie noticed something else. No matter where they went, people remembered him. Not because of his wealth, because he remembered them first. He greeted parking attendants by name, thanked servers sincerely, asked store owners about their families. Those quiet acts of kindness impressed Virginie far more than anything money could buy. For the first time in years, she found herself imagining a future without even realizing she was doing it. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of their lives. Meeting once a week became 3 times, then nearly every day. Angelo introduced Virginie to his parents during a relaxed Sunday lunch. His mother welcomed her with a warm hug. "We've heard so much about you." Virginie smiled, hopefully only the good parts. His father chuckled. "Judging by the way our son talks about you, we'd have to search very hard to find anything else." A few weeks later, Angelo met Virginie's parents. Her father shook his hand firmly before asking, "Can you handle losing at board games?" Angelo looked confused. "Why?" Virginie's mother laughed. "Because that's how this family settles disagreements." By the end of the evening, Angelo had lost 3 games in a row. He placed his final card on the table and sighed dramatically. "I suspect I've been set up." Virginie's father grinned. "Now you're officially family." The room burst into laughter. Neither family felt forced. There were no awkward silences, no attempts to impress, just easy conversations, shared meals, and stories that stretched late into the evening. Driving home, Angelo glanced toward Virginie. "I like your family, even after they humiliated you, especially after that." She smiled. "Good answer." Later that night, they sat on the balcony as either of them felt pressured, because imagining tomorrow together felt exciting. One afternoon, they wandered through a neighborhood where children rode bicycles along tree-lined streets. A little boy chased a soccer ball across a front lawn while his younger sister giggled behind him. Virginie slowed her pace. "I love neighborhoods like this." Angelo looked around. "Because they're quiet?" She shook her head. "Because they feel lived in." He smiled. "I know exactly what you mean." They paused outside a small house with a wide front porch. Flower boxes lined the windows. A wooden swing hung from one corner. Virginie pointed toward it. "That's my dream. The swing, the life." She folded her arms thoughtfully. "A place where people actually spend time together instead of rushing past each other." Sunday mornings, family dinners, children running through the backyard. It sounded perfect. Weeks later, while driving home after visiting friends, music played softly through the speakers. Virginie reached over and changed the playlist. Angelo protested immediately. Excuse me. What? You skipped 3 excellent songs. Excellent according to you. History will remember this injustice. History has bigger problems. Not today, she laughed. You're impossible. Yet here you are. Unfortunately, they spent the next 30 minutes arguing over whose playlist deserved control of the drive. By the time they reached home, neither could remember who had won, only that they'd laughed the entire way. Those little disagreements became part of their relationship. Neither needed to be right. Being together mattered far more. One evening, while cooking dinner, smoke suddenly filled the kitchen. Virginie rushed toward the stove. The pasta! Angelo grabbed a towel and started waving smoke away. I thought you said you knew this recipe. I do. Then why is it trying to escape? She burst into laughter despite the mess. Dinner that night became takeout pizza eaten straight from the box while sitting on the kitchen floor. Neither complained. Somehow, even disasters became favorite memories. By the end of the year, everyone close to them assumed an engagement was only a matter of time. The only person pretending otherwise was Angelo. One afternoon, he quietly visited a local jeweler after work. The owner placed several rings on the counter. Looking for something traditional? Angelo studied them carefully before shaking his head. No. Something modern? Another pause. I'm looking for something that feels like her. The jeweler smiled. Tell me about her. For nearly 20 minutes, Angelo didn't mention her career. He didn't mention how beautiful she was. Instead, he spoke about the way she remembered people's birthdays, how children trusted her almost instantly, how she could calm an entire room simply by walking into it. The jeweler listened quietly before reaching beneath the counter and placing one final ring in front of him. Timeless. Angelo stared at it for several seconds. That's the one. A few evenings later, the two of them took a walk beside a peaceful lakeside trail as the sun settled low across the water. Without warning, Angelo broke the comfortable silence. I've signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Virginie raised an eyebrow. Is that supposed to impress me? He laughed softly. Not even a little. He slipped his hand into hers. I'm saying asking you out scared me more than any business deal I've ever made. She smiled. Good thing I said yes before you tried negotiating. They both laughed. Angelo looked at her for a long moment. The ring was already hidden safely in his desk drawer at home. He knew exactly when he wanted to ask her to marry him. He had imagined every detail. He believed the hardest part of their story was already behind them. Neither of them realized that one unexpected appointment was about to test everything they had built together. A few weeks later, Virginie scheduled what she believed would be an ordinary medical checkup. She almost canceled it. Work had been busy. A client wanted last-minute changes to a school renovation project, and her calendar was overflowing. Still, she kept the appointment. The waiting room was quiet. A television mounted on the wall played a cooking show that no one seemed to be watching. Across from her, a little girl proudly showed her mother a drawing she'd colored while they waited. Virginie smiled politely before returning to the magazine in her lap. A nurse soon appeared. Miss Sauer? Virginie stood. Right here. The examination itself was straightforward. Questions, routine tests, a few additional scans the doctor recommended after noticing something that deserved a closer look. None of it seemed alarming. The doctor remained calm throughout. When everything was finished, he folded his hands together. I'd like to discuss the results with you. Virginie nodded. Of course. His tone stayed gentle. There's no emergency, and your overall health is good. She felt herself relax. Then he continued. However, there are signs that becoming pregnant naturally could be more difficult than expected. Virginie blinked. Difficult? Yes, he chose each word carefully. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm saying the road may not be as simple as you hoped. The room became strangely quiet. She wasn't hearing bad news, but she wasn't hearing reassuring news either. She thanked the doctor, accepted the information he handed her, and walked toward the parking lot carrying far more than a folder. Virginie unlocked her car but didn't start the engine. Instead, she sat behind the steering wheel, staring through the windshield without really seeing the traffic moving beyond it. She replayed the doctor's words again and again. Not impossible, more difficult. There are options. None of those sentences answered the question weighing on her heart. Had always dreamed of becoming a father. Would this change everything? She rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed. Angelo. Dinner tonight? I found that little Italian place you wanted to try. She smiled despite herself. For several seconds she typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally she wrote, I'd love to. Can we make it a little later? I need to finish something first. Almost immediately his reply appeared. Take all the time you need. I'll be there whenever you're ready. She closed her eyes. That message made everything harder. Not because he'd done anything wrong, because she knew she couldn't keep this from him. On the drive home, she passed a neighborhood park where parents pushed swings and children chased one another across the grass. Normally, scenes like that made her smile. Today, they filled her with questions she wasn't ready to answer. She wasn't mourning something she'd lost. She was mourning certainty. And sometimes uncertainty can feel just as heavy. That evening, Angelo noticed something was different the moment Virginie sat down across from him. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Halfway through dinner, he gently set his fork aside. Talk to me. She looked down at her hands. I went to the doctor today. His expression immediately changed. Are you okay? Yes. She nodded quickly. I'm healthy. He released a quiet breath. Then she continued. But they found something. She explained everything exactly as the doctor had explained it. No exaggeration, no dramatic conclusions, only facts. When she finally finished, silence settled between them. Angelo reached across the table without hesitation and took both of her hands. Hey, she looked up. We're okay. His voice was steady. Do you hear me? She nodded faintly. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. The tears she'd been holding back finally escaped. I was so afraid you'd think differently about me. He squeezed her hands. Never. After dinner, they walked through a nearby neighborhood instead of driving home. Angelo kept one arm around her shoulders. Neither spoke very much. Sometimes comfort doesn't come from finding the right words. Sometimes it comes from simply refusing to let go. That night, Virginie fell asleep believing nothing had changed between them. She trusted the promise he'd made. She had no reason not to. For a little while, nothing seemed different. Angelo still called every morning, still kissed her goodbye before work, still made plans for weekends together. But slowly, almost too quietly to notice, little things began to change. One afternoon, Virginie found several medical articles open on Angelo's laptop. He closed the screen almost immediately. Just reading. She nodded. She didn't think much of it. A week later, they were supposed to tour a wedding venue a friend had recommended. That morning, Angelo called. I'm sorry. Something came up at work. Can we reschedule? Of course. Then another appointment disappeared. Then another. The engagement ring remained hidden where he'd left it. Conversations about the future became shorter. When friends asked jokingly, So, when's the wedding? Angelo answered with a smile. We're taking our time. Virginie noticed the hesitation, not because he stopped loving her, because he stopped sounding certain. Late one evening, she walked into his home office carrying 2 mugs of tea. He was reading another medical article. This time, he didn't close the computer. She quietly placed the mug beside him. You're looking for answers, aren't you? He stared at the screen for a moment before answering. I don't know what I'm looking for anymore. Those words settled heavily between them. For the first time since they'd met, Virginie realized that love and fear were beginning to occupy the same space, and fear was slowly asking for more room. The changes didn't happen all at once. They arrived so quietly that, at first, Virginie convinced herself she was imagining them. Angelo still called, still asked how her day had gone, still remembered to bring her favorite chocolate when he stopped by after work. But something was missing. He no longer spoke about next year. The conversations that once stretched late into the night became shorter. When they walked past neighborhoods they used to admire, Angelo no longer pointed out houses he liked. When friends joked about wedding plans, he laughed politely before changing the subject. One Saturday afternoon, Virginie found a folder tucked beneath a stack of business reports on his desk. She wasn't searching through his things. She had simply been looking for a pen. The label caught her attention. Family planning options. She froze. Before she could look away, Angelo stepped into the room. He stopped when he saw the folder in her hands. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Virginie placed it back exactly where she'd found it. I wasn't snooping. I know. Why didn't you tell me you've been reading all of this? Angelo rubbed the back of his neck. Because I didn't want you to think I was worried. She searched his face. But you are worried. He didn't answer. That silence said enough. A few evenings later, they sat on the balcony outside Virginie's apartment. The city below carried on as always. Cars passed. Neighbors walked their dogs. Someone nearby practiced the piano with more enthusiasm than talent. Normally, moments like this brought them peace. Tonight, neither knew how to begin. Virginie finally broke the silence. Do you remember that little house with the porch swing? Angelo smiled faintly. Of course. You used to say we'd grow old there. I remember. Do you still picture it? He looked toward the skyline instead of answering her. She waited. After several long seconds, he sighed. I don't know anymore. Those 5 words landed harder than she expected. You don't know because of me? He turned quickly. That's not fair. Then help me understand. His voice remained calm. I've spent every day trying to understand this myself. Virginie nodded. Then let me help. I don't even know what to ask. Start with the truth. He closed his eyes briefly. I'm trying. But neither of them felt any closer to it. Several days passed. Neither brought the subject up again. Until one evening, Virginie arrived at Angelo's house carrying takeout from their favorite restaurant. She found him sitting alone in the living room. The television was on. He wasn't watching it. She placed the food on the table. You forgot dinner again, didn't you? He looked up and managed a tired smile. Maybe. She sat beside him. We're pretending everything is normal. He stared ahead. I know, and it isn't. Another quiet moment settled between them. Virginie reached for his hand. Please tell me what's happening inside your head. He held her hand tightly, almost as though he were afraid that once he let go, he wouldn't know how to reach for it again. I've wanted children for as long as I can remember. She nodded gently. So have I. I know. Then why does it feel like we're standing on opposite sides of the room? He swallowed. Because I don't know if I can stop wondering. He couldn't finish. Virginie whispered. Wondering what? I've wanted children for as long as I can remember. She nodded gently. So have I. I know. Then why does it feel like we're standing on opposite sides of the room? He swallowed. Because I don't know if I can stop wondering. He couldn't finish. Virginie whispered. Wondering what? Whether we'll ever have the family we've imagined. She looked at him quietly. Neither of us knows that answer. Exactly. So why are you carrying it alone? He lowered his eyes. Because every time I think about our future, I become afraid. Those words hurt. Not because fear existed, because it had become stronger than hope. Virginie took a slow breath. Look at me. Angelo did. She spoke softly. If this were happening to you instead of me. He listened. Do you believe I'd be sitting here wondering whether to stay? His answer came immediately. No. Why? Because that's who you are. She nodded. Then why isn't that who you are? His shoulders dropped. For the first time, she saw not a confident businessman, but a frightened man who had talked himself into believing certainty was the only safe choice. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I've always imagined teaching my son to ride a bike. A tear slipped down Virginie's cheek. Maybe you would. I've imagined family vacations. Maybe we'd have them. Christmas mornings with children running downstairs. Maybe that would happen too. He closed his eyes. Maybe isn't something I know how to build my life around. Virginie felt her heart sink. She asked one final question. So everything we've built depends on something neither of us can control. The room fell silent. When Angelo finally answered, his words were painfully calm. You'll never know what it's like to be a mother. The sentence wasn't shouted. There was no anger, no accusation, only fear disguised as certainty, and somehow that made it hurt even more. Neither of them spoke after that. Virginie slowly stood. She wiped away the tears she hadn't realized were still falling. Angelo rose too. Virginie. She looked at him, not with anger, not with hatred, only with quiet disappointment. Do you know what hurts the most? She asked. He remained silent. It isn't what you said. Another pause. It's that somewhere along the way, you stopped believing we were on the same team. He reached toward her. She gently stepped back. I still love you. His voice cracked. She nodded. I know. Please. She shook her head softly. Love can't survive where acceptance ends. Those were the last words she spoke before walking toward the front door. She didn't slam it. She didn't look back. Outside, the night carried on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Cars passed. Lights glowed from nearby homes. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. Virginie took one slow breath after another as she walked to her car. Her future had just changed, not because she had received difficult medical news, but because the man she planned to spend her life with had allowed fear to decide what love no longer could. Behind the closed front door, Angelo remained exactly where she had left him. For the first time in his life, success, money, and certainty offered no comfort at all. The The weeks after the breakup passed in a blur. Virginie answered only the calls she had to answer. She buried herself in work, accepted every project she could handle, and politely declined invitations from friends who worried about her. One morning, while looking over blueprints in her office, she caught herself staring at the same page for nearly 10 minutes. Nothing was sinking in. That afternoon she made a decision. She accepted an opportunity to relocate to another city and open a small architecture studio of her own. It wasn't an escape. It was a chance to start somewhere that carried no memories. The new office was modest. One conference room, a handful of desks, large windows that overlooked a busy neighborhood where people hurried to work every morning. Her first employee, a young designer named Emma, looked around the empty space and smiled. "It's small." Virginie laughed. "For now. You really think we'll fill every desk one day?" Virginie looked across the room, one project at a time. Those became the words that guided both her business and her healing. One project, one morning, one step at a time. The first year wasn't easy. Some months were busy, others weren't. Virginie often stayed late, reviewing plans after everyone else had gone home. One evening, Emma peeked into her office. "You're still here?" Virginie smiled without looking up. "Apparently." Emma walked inside carrying 2 cups of tea. "My grandmother says people make better decisions after taking a break." Virginie accepted the cup. "Your grandmother sounds wise. She also thinks every problem can be solved with homemade pie." Virginie laughed for the first time that day. "I'm willing to test her theory." Slowly, the studio gained a reputation for thoughtful designs that put people before appearances. Community centers, neighborhood libraries, affordable housing, projects that mattered. Clients returned because Virginie listened before she sketched. She believed every building should serve the people inside it, not simply impress those driving past. As her business grew, so did her confidence. She no longer measured her future by what she'd lost. She measured it by what she was creating. There were still difficult evenings, moments when an old photograph appeared while cleaning a drawer, moments when she wondered how Angela was doing. But those moments became fewer, and they no longer lasted as long. Life settled into a gentle rhythm. Her parents visited often. Claire called every Sunday without fail. Sometimes they laughed for an hour. Sometimes they talked about nothing important at all. That ordinary comfort mattered more than either of them realized. One birthday, Claire arrived carrying a cake that leaned noticeably to one side. Virginie stared at it. "Please tell me the bakery gave it to you like this." Claire looked offended. "I made it. That explains everything. Eat it before you criticize my artistic vision." They laughed until tears filled their eyes. For the first time in years, Virginie noticed something surprising. She had laughed without forcing herself, without pretending, without feeling guilty afterward. Healing hadn't arrived all at once. It had arrived quietly, hidden inside ordinary days. She wasn't waiting for life to begin anymore. She was already living it. One evening, after locking the office, she paused outside the building and watched families heading home together. Instead of wondering why her life looked different, she simply smiled. Her story wasn't finished yet. She didn't know what the next chapter would bring. But for the first time since leaving Angelo, she looked toward tomorrow with genuine curiosity instead of fear. Nearly 2 years had passed. Virginie had stopped asking herself the question that once followed her everywhere. What if things had turned out differently? She understood now that some questions never receive satisfying answers, and maybe they don't need to. One afternoon, Emma walked into her office carrying a folder. "We've been invited to submit a proposal for a community youth center." Virginie looked up with interest. "Really?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "The city wants a place where students can study after school, families can gather on weekends, and local organizations can host events." Virginie's eyes brightened. "That's exactly the kind of project we should be doing." She flipped through the information carefully. Near the bottom of one page was a list of people involved in the project. Architects, teachers, community leaders, volunteers. One name caught her attention. Miguel Barton, history teacher. She didn't think much of it. To her, it was simply another person she'd probably meet during planning meetings. She closed the folder with a quiet smile. "Let's do our best work." Emma grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." Neither woman could have known that accepting one community project would introduce Virginie to the person who would love her without conditions, change the direction of her life forever, and prove that sometimes the happiest chapters begin on the most ordinary day imaginable. The first planning meeting for the community youth center took place inside an old public library that was being renovated. Architects spread drawings across long tables. Teachers discussed classroom needs. Parents offered suggestions about after-school programs. Everyone seemed eager to speak at once. Virginie arrived a few minutes early, balancing rolled-up blueprints under one arm and a notebook under the other. As she reached for the meeting room door, someone opened it from the inside. "After you," the man said. "Thank you." He smiled politely before stepping aside. During introductions, Virginie heard the same voice again. "I'm Miguel Barton. I teach history at Lincoln Middle School." She glanced up. It was the man who had held the door. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He didn't dominate the conversation. Instead, he listened carefully before speaking. When he finally offered an idea, everyone paused to hear him. "If we're building this center for children," Miguel said, "let's give them spaces where they feel welcome instead of spaces that simply look impressive." Virginie looked at him with quiet interest. She had been thinking the exact same thing. After the meeting ended, she rolled her blueprints together. Miguel walked beside her toward the parking lot. "You designed the library renovation across town, didn't you?" She smiled. "I did. My students loved it. You've been there?" "More times than I can count." He laughed softly. "They think it's a field trip. I tell them it's homework disguised as fun." Virginie laughed. "That's a clever way to get them through the door." "Works every time." It wasn't a dramatic first meeting. No sparks, no instant attraction. Just two people who enjoyed talking. Over the following months, meetings became more frequent. Sometimes they discussed classroom layouts, sometimes outdoor reading spaces, sometimes nothing related to work at all. One afternoon, the construction site lost power for nearly an hour. With little they could accomplish, everyone gathered outside. Miguel returned from a nearby cafe carrying a tray of coffee cups. "I guessed," he admitted. "Hopefully I guessed correctly." He handed one to Virginie. She took a sip, then looked at him in surprise. "Hazelnut?" He nodded. "You ordered it at the last 3 meetings." She smiled. "You noticed?" "History teachers notice everything." "Is that in the job description?" "Page 2. She laughed. Unlike Angelo, Miguel never filled every silence. He seemed comfortable allowing conversations to breathe. If Virginie needed a moment to think, he waited. If she changed the subject, he followed naturally. There was no pressure, no performance, just kindness. One evening, after a long planning session, Miguel walked her to her car. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever take a day off?" She laughed. "Occasionally." "Good. Why?" "Because I'd like to buy you lunch one of those days." Virginie looked at him for a moment, not because she was unsure about him, because she realized it had been a long time since someone had asked her out without making her feel rushed. She smiled. "Lunch sounds nice." Months passed before either of them called what they had a relationship. There was no dramatic moment. One day they simply realized they preferred spending time together whenever they could. Still, one conversation remained. Virginie knew she couldn't avoid it forever. One quiet evening they sat together on a park bench after dinner. Children chased one another across a nearby playground while parents watched from a distance. Virginie looked down at her hands. "There's something I need to tell you." Miguel nodded. "I'm listening." She took a slow breath. Then she told him everything. Meeting Angelo, falling in love, the doctor's appointment, the breakup, the sentence she had never forgotten. When she finally finished, she stared ahead instead of looking at him. She had prepared herself for questions, for hesitation, even disappointment. Instead, Miguel reached over and gently held her hand. Nothing more, nothing less. After a quiet moment, he spoke. "Thank you for trusting me with that." Virginie finally looked at him. "That's all you're going to say?" He smiled gently. "No." Another pause. "If we spend our lives together." She waited. "I'll be marrying you." He squeezed her hand softly. "Not a medical report. Not a prediction. You." Tears filled Virginie's eyes before she could stop them. Not because of what he promised, because he never made her feel as though she had something to prove. From that evening forward, everything between them became wonderfully simple. Miguel didn't pretend difficult days wouldn't come. He simply chose to face them beside her. Several months later, while preparing dinner together, he suddenly turned toward her. "I have a question." Virginie smiled. "Should I be worried?" "Probably." He reached into his pocket. Instead of a polished speech, he laughed nervously. "I practiced this all afternoon. And? I've forgotten every word." Virginie laughed. "That bad?" "Much worse." He looked directly into her eyes. "So I'll keep it simple." He took her hand. "I love the life we've already built. I love the person you are when nobody's watching. And I don't want to imagine another morning without you in it." He opened a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Virginie's eyes filled with tears, not because the proposal was perfect, because it was honest. She nodded before she managed to speak. Yes. Miguel laughed with relief. That's fortunate. Why? Because I forgot to prepare a backup plan. She wrapped her arms around him, laughing through happy tears. Their wedding several months later reflected exactly who they were. Family, close friends, simple vows, loud laughter, good food, no grand performance, just two people promising to choose one another every single day, especially on the days when life refused to follow the plans they had carefully made. For Virginie, it wasn't just the beginning of another marriage. It was the first time she understood what unconditional love truly felt like. Marriage didn't erase every uncertainty. Virginie and Miguel knew that. They never expected a wedding ring to solve questions that medicine couldn't answer. Instead, they made one quiet promise to each other. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Some months were filled with hope. Others ended with disappointment. Appointments became part of their routine. So did long drives home where neither felt the need to force a conversation. One afternoon, after meeting with a fertility specialist, Miguel reached over and took Virginie's hand before she could unbuckle her seatbelt. She looked at him. I'm sorry. He frowned. For what? For putting you through all this. Miguel shook his head almost immediately. You're not putting me through anything. She lowered her eyes. This isn't the future you imagined. He smiled gently. Maybe not. She finally looked back at him. Then why are you smiling? Because the future I imagined never included you. She blinked. He squeezed her hand. Now it does. That makes this future better than the one I planned. Virginie laughed through tears. Moments like that carried them through the difficult ones. Neither counted failures. Neither kept score. Every new day simply became another chance to hope. Nearly 2 years into their marriage, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, family dinners, weekend projects around the house. Nothing unusual. Then came an ordinary Tuesday. Virginie woke earlier than usual. She wandered into the bathroom while Miguel was still asleep. Several minutes later, she stared silently at the small test in her hands. She looked once, then again. Surely she was reading it incorrectly. Her heart began racing. She walked slowly back toward the bedroom. Miguel opened one eye. You're awake early. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him the test. Still half asleep, he frowned. What am I looking at? A second later, his eyes widened. He sat upright so quickly the blanket slipped onto the floor. Is this? Virginie nodded. Neither of them spoke. Neither laughed. Neither cried. Not yet. They simply stared at each other, overwhelmed by the possibility that the moment they'd almost stopped expecting had finally arrived. Miguel reached for her. She collapsed into his arms. Only then did the tears come. Happy tears, relieved tears, the kind that carry years of waiting inside them. Between quiet sobs, Miguel whispered, We're going to be parents. Virginie smiled against his shoulder. I think we are. The first weeks passed carefully. Virginie followed every medical instruction. Miguel became wonderfully overprotective. Don't lift that. Miguel, it's a grocery bag. It's a heavy grocery bag. She laughed. There's bread inside. Heavy bread. She shook her head. You're impossible. Occupational hazard. At the 12-week appointment, they sat side by side, fingers intertwined. The ultrasound technician studied the monitor quietly. She moved the scanner slightly, then paused. Virginie's smile faded. Is everything all right? The technician smiled but didn't answer immediately. One moment, she stepped outside to bring the doctor into the room. Virginie's heart pounded. Miguel. He squeezed her hand. We're okay. The doctor entered, glanced at the screen, then chuckled softly. Well. Virginie searched his face. Please don't keep us guessing. He pointed toward the monitor. I was checking because I wanted to be absolutely certain. Another pause. Then he grinned. I count 4. Silence. Complete silence. Virginie looked at Miguel. Miguel looked at the doctor. The doctor laughed. Believe me. That's usually everyone's first reaction. Virginie finally found her voice. 4? 4 healthy babies? Miguel blinked several times. You're serious? Very serious. For a few wonderful seconds, neither of them knew whether to laugh or cry. Eventually, they did both. The months that followed were wonderfully chaotic. Friends arrived carrying tiny clothes. Grandparents debated baby names before the parents had decided. Miguel assembled 4 cribs after reading the instruction manual upside down. Virginie walked into the nursery just in time to see him staring at several leftover screws. Please tell me those aren't important. He looked at them thoughtfully. I'm choosing optimism. She burst into laughter. Let's call your brother. Excellent idea. When the babies finally arrived, the hospital room became a parade of joyful visitors. Nurses joked that the newborns had already formed their own little team. Each child seemed to have a completely different personality. One rarely stopped moving. Another slept peacefully through almost everything. One demanded attention the moment anyone else received it. The youngest watched the world with wide, curious eyes. Their home quickly became filled with tiny shoes near the front door, toy blocks beneath the dining table, storybooks stacked beside the couch, bedtime songs, morning giggles, crayon drawings proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Some evenings, Miguel and Virginie looked around the wonderfully untidy living room and simply laughed. Years earlier, both had wondered whether this life would ever exist. Now the greatest challenge was convincing four energetic children that bedtime actually meant bedtime. One evening, after finally settling everyone to sleep, Miguel quietly sat beside Virginie on the couch. Neither spoke for a while. He looked around the room before smiling. "Remember when we thought this house felt too big?" Virginie rested her head against his shoulder. "Now it somehow feels too small." Miguel laughed softly. "Best problem we've ever had." Virginie smiled. She knew he was right. The life she'd once feared she might never experience had arrived in a way neither of them could have imagined. Not because she had defeated impossible odds, but because she never allowed someone else's fear to become the final word on her future. While Virginie's life filled with bedtime stories, school lunches, and tiny footsteps racing through the house, Angelo's world expanded in a very different direction. His company grew faster than anyone had predicted. Every few months, another business magazine requested an interview. Television hosts praised his leadership. Industry conferences invited him to deliver keynote speeches. His calendar became so full that his assistant often reminded him to schedule time to rest. One afternoon, after finishing a television interview, a producer smiled. "You've built an incredible life, Mr. Harbour." Angelo thanked her politely. The answer came automatically. He'd given it dozens of times. His driver opened the car door. "Home, sir?" Angelo nodded. As the city passed outside the window, he loosened his tie and closed his eyes. The day had been successful. The quarter had been profitable. The headlines would be positive. Yet when he finally walked into his quiet house that evening, the silence greeted him before anyone else did. He poured himself a glass of water, looked around the immaculate kitchen, and stood there longer than necessary. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Still, something felt missing, not because his life lacked comfort, because comfort and fulfillment had slowly become two different things. Certain memories have a way of appearing when they're least expected. For Angelo, it usually happened during ordinary moments. A father helping his daughter learn to ride a bicycle, a little boy running toward his mother after school, a family laughing together at a nearby restaurant. None of those scenes lasted more than a few seconds, yet each one reminded him of conversations he once had with Virginie. One Saturday morning, he stopped at a neighborhood cafe before heading to the office. The table beside him was occupied by a young couple making breakfast far more entertaining than the food itself. Their little son proudly held up a drawing. "Daddy, look!" The man smiled. "That's amazing! It's us!" His wife leaned over. "You even remembered my curly hair." The child nodded proudly. "Because it's my favorite." The parents laughed. Angelo found himself smiling too. Then, without warning, another memory took its place. Virginie standing outside that small house with the front porch. "That's my dream." He remembered every word. He also remembered the day he walked away from it. The coffee in front of him had gone cold before he realized he hadn't taken another sip. Time moved forward. Eventually, Angelo met someone new. Her name was Rebecca. She was thoughtful, intelligent, and genuinely kind. She never cared about magazine covers or business awards. She cared about people. That was one of the reasons Angelo admired her. Their relationship developed steadily. No drama, no uncertainty. 2 years later, they became engaged. Friends celebrated. His parents expressed quiet relief. Everyone believed Angelo had finally found peace. Most days, he believed it too. Rebecca noticed little things others overlooked. She noticed when he became unusually quiet after passing a playground. She noticed how he lingered whenever families gathered for charity events. One evening, while choosing flowers for the wedding, she looked at him carefully. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you nervous about getting married?" He smiled. "A little." She nodded. "Me too." She laughed softly before continuing. "I wasn't asking about the wedding." He looked at her. "I was asking whether there's a part of your past you still haven't forgiven." Angelo didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, someone had asked the exact question he'd been avoiding himself. The week of the wedding arrived. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail. Family members traveled from across the country. Friends filled nearby hotels. The ceremony would take place at a beautiful country estate known for hosting both weddings and community fundraising events. The evening before the ceremony, Angela reviewed the final schedule with the event coordinator. She smiled. Everything should run smoothly tomorrow. She pointed to the itinerary. One small thing to mention. Angela looked up. There's a children's charity appreciation event finishing on the East Garden shortly before your guests begin arriving. The groups will be directed through separate entrances, so there shouldn't be any inconvenience. No problem, Angela replied. He barely gave it another thought. Why would he? To him it was simply another event ending before his own began. He had no way of knowing that one of the honored guests at that charity celebration was an architect whose foundation had recently funded the construction of a pediatric learning center. He certainly didn't know she would arrive with her husband, or that 4 energetic 5-year-olds would forget every instruction about walking calmly the moment they spotted their mother. By this time tomorrow, the carefully ordered world Angelo had spent 5 years rebuilding would pause for one unforgettable moment, not because anyone had come seeking revenge, but because life has a remarkable way of placing people face to face with the choices that shape them. The country estate had been bustling since sunrise. On one side of the property, volunteers were wrapping up a children's charity celebration, honoring organizations that had helped build learning centers across the state. On the other side, florists adjusted the final arrangements while wedding guests slowly began arriving for Angelo and Rebecca's ceremony. The 2 events had separate schedules, separate entrances, separate guest lists. Everything had been carefully organized. Virginie arrived carrying a small gift bag filled with children's art supplies that one of the young winners had forgotten to collect. Miguel walked beside her, balancing 4 light jackets over one shoulder while keeping an eye on their energetic children. Everybody remember the plan? Miguel asked. 4 little voices answered at once. Yes, Virginie smiled. And what was the plan? One little boy grinned. Stay close, a little girl proudly added. No running. Miguel raised an eyebrow. Excellent. The children nodded with complete confidence. It lasted almost 10 seconds. The moment they spotted their mother stepping toward another volunteer, excitement took over. Mom! Before either parent could react, 4 tiny pairs of shoes flew across the garden path. Miguel laughed helplessly. Well, that plan didn't survive very long. Across the estate, Angelo had just stepped outside to greet a few relatives before the ceremony. His best man adjusted his tie. You still have time to change your mind. Angelo smiled. Not a chance. A burst of laughter drifted across the garden. Then came 4 excited voices. Mom! Almost everyone nearby turned toward the sound. 4 children ran straight toward a woman standing near the walkway. They wrapped themselves around her legs, talking over one another so quickly that none of their sentences made complete sense. Virginie bent down, laughing as she tried to understand all 4 stories at once. One at a time. I can't hear everybody. Miguel caught up a few seconds later. I told you we'd lose the race. One little girl looked up proudly. We won. You certainly did. Angelo looked over with casual curiosity. Then everything around him seemed to disappear. His smile faded. The conversations nearby became distant. The music no longer reached him. There she was, Virginie, 5 years older, 5 years happier, surrounded by the very life he had once convinced himself she would never have. His lips parted slightly. Virginie. The name escaped before he realized he had spoken aloud. Rebecca noticed the change immediately. She followed Angelo's gaze. Do you know her? He answered honestly. I used to. Before either of them moved, one of the little girls looked toward Angelo. She tugged gently on Virginie's hand. Mommy? Virginie looked down. Yes, sweetheart. The child pointed across the garden. Who's that man? For a brief moment, Virginie turned. Her eyes met Angelo's. Years earlier, she had imagined this moment 100 different ways. She had imagined anger. She had imagined tears. She had imagined wanting him to regret everything. Instead, she felt none of those things. Time had quietly replaced pain with peace. She smiled politely, the same kind of smile she would have offered any familiar face from another chapter of her life. She looked back at her daughter. Someone who helped me become the person I am today. The little girl accepted the answer without another question. Okay. She immediately returned to telling her mother about the drawing competition she had just won. Miguel stepped beside Virginie. Everything all right? She smiled. Everything's perfect. He glanced toward Angelo, then back at her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need explanations. Instead, he reached for her hand. She gladly took it. Together, they began walking toward the parking area with 4 children happily chatting around them. No dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, no attempt to embarrass anyone. Their happiness spoke more clearly than any argument ever could. Angelo remained where he was. His best man quietly placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" He nodded automatically. "Yeah." But he wasn't. Not because Virginie had arrived, not because she had children, not even because there were 4 of them. He was shaken because every assumption he'd once treated as certainty had quietly fallen apart. He remembered the evening she'd asked him one simple question. "So everything we've built depends on something neither of us can control?" At the time, he'd believed he was making the responsible decision. He had convinced himself that walking away would protect him from future heartbreak. Instead, he had lost someone who had loved him without hesitation. Rebecca stepped closer. She looked toward the family disappearing down the garden path before turning back to Angelo. "She seems happy," he smiled sadly. "She deserves to be." Rebecca slipped her hand into his. "So do you." Angelo looked at her and nodded. For the first time in years, he stopped asking himself what might have happened if he'd made a different choice. That answer now belonged to another life. Virginie wasn't standing there to make him feel guilty. She hadn't come to prove him wrong. She hadn't even known he would be there. Life had simply allowed him to witness something he never expected to see. A woman he'd underestimated, a family built on unwavering love, and a future that existed because someone else had chosen commitment over fear. As wedding music began once again, Angelo took one final look toward the garden gate where Virginie, Miguel, and their 4 children had disappeared from view. Then he quietly turned back toward the ceremony. This time, with a heart that finally understood what it had cost him to mistake certainty for love. As Virginie and Miguel reached the parking area, the children continued talking over one another, each determined to be heard first. "Mom, did you see my medal? Dad said we can stop for ice cream. Can we go to Grandma's after?" Miguel laughed. "One question at a time, team." The oldest folded his arms with exaggerated seriousness. "We're not a team." His sister immediately disagreed. "Yes, we are." Virginie smiled as she opened the van door. "You're definitely a team." The children climbed inside, still debating who had won the art contest, who deserved the window seat, and whether chocolate or strawberry ice cream was the better choice. Miguel leaned against the open door. "Well," Virginie looked at him. "That was unexpected." He nodded. "Are you okay?" She thought about the question before answering. She glanced toward the estate one final time, then she smiled. "I am." Not because seeing Angelo had erased the past, because it reminded her how far she had come. The chapter that once broke her heart no longer controlled it. She closed the van door gently. Home was waiting, and it was filled with everything she had once dreamed of. Back at the ceremony, guests settled into their seats as soft music began once again. Angelo stood at the front beside his best man, but his thoughts were no longer racing. For the first time in years, everything felt surprisingly clear. He finally understood that the greatest mistake he had made wasn't ending a relationship. It was believing fear deserved the final vote. He had loved Virginie, that had always been true, but instead of walking beside her into an uncertain future, he had stepped away because he couldn't promise himself a perfect outcome. Life had never asked for perfection. It had only asked for trust. He looked toward the aisle where Rebecca would soon appear. She deserved a husband whose heart was fully present, not someone trapped inside old regrets. Angelo took a slow breath. He silently wished Virginie every happiness, not because he expected forgiveness, not because he hoped their paths would cross again, simply because she had once loved him sincerely, and she had earned every smile life had given her since. Some people believe life's greatest victories are measured by wealth, titles, or recognition. This story tells a different truth. Virginie didn't win because she became the mother of 4 beautiful children. She had already won the day she refused to let someone else's doubts define her future. Her strength wasn't found in proving anyone wrong. It was found in continuing to believe that she was worthy of love, even after someone she trusted walked away. Miguel didn't rescue her. He simply loved her without asking her to earn it. And Angelo wasn't a monster. He was a man who allowed fear to speak louder than commitment. That choice changed 3 lives. One painful conversation ended a relationship. Another honest conversation years later built a family. Sometimes the direction of an entire lifetime changes because of a single sentence. That's why the words we choose and the courage behind them matter more than we realize. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to hear what you think. If you had been in Virginie's position, could you have forgiven someone who walked away because of fear? Or do you believe some decisions close a door forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and your perspective might encourage someone else who's listening today. If this story touched your heart, Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Mr. Williams Storytime for more unforgettable stories about love, second chances, resilience, and the choices that shape our lives. And if someone you care about needs a reminder that their future isn't limited by another person's opinion, send this story their way. You never know whose day it might brighten. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Until our next story, take care of yourself, keep believing in brighter chapters ahead, and remember this: the people who truly belong in your life won't stay because the future is guaranteed. They'll stay because you're worth choosing, even when the future is still being written.